Welcome to the Scalable Computing Podcast, joining you from Stanford in the heart of Silicon Valley. In this podcast, we discuss everything about cloud computing, machine learning, and large-scale systems. This season, you'll be joined by world-renowned guests from both industry and academia who have engineered and built some of the largest scalable computing systems in the world. Your host is Dr. Lamia Youssef, a scalable computing leader, one of the early engineers at Google Cloud, and former Microsoft and Facebook technology leader. This podcast is sponsored by Jazz Computing. Sign up for updates and new episodes at jazzcomputing.com/podcast. And without further ado, let me welcome your host, Dr. Lamia Youssef.
Welcome back, everyone. My guest today is Joe Spisak. Joe is the product lead of Pytorch at Facebook. He leads the overall strategy, execution, and product management of open source AI at Facebook. Prior to Facebook, he led AI partnership and AI platforms for Amazon AWS. And prior to that, he also led the Intel AI open source strategy. Joe is also a good friend. He's one of the most collaborative and helpful leaders one will meet, with very high IQ, EQ, and a very positive influence on everyone around him. Today, Joe and I chatted about Pytorch, where it started and where it's going next. We chatted about the future of MLOps. We chatted about open source AI strategies across Intel, Amazon, and Facebook. And we also chatted about self-supervised machine learning, differential privacy, and GNNs. Stay tuned to hear how Joe is describing the use of Pytorch in the productization of M&M candy. Joe, it's awesome to see you again. Welcome to the show.
So nice to see you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. We're very glad that you're here today.
Thank you.
So before going to Pytorch, let's take a step back at your role at Intel and the work that you have done over there, especially very early days with AI strategy. Tell us more. What can you share with us?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my whole career has been a pretty nonlinear path. Back when I was kind of a double E early on and ended up landing in Intel and, working on cloud transcoding at the time was kind of a novel thing to be, doing transcoding, on things like AWS. Everyone would do kind of these bespoke solutions and broadcast, and there was really no clean and open and available solutions. So we had this startup that was inside of Intel. It was kind of it was funded by one of the executives, and I got pulled in from the outside to kind of lead, product and strategy. And it was a short-lived position because we ended up selling off the business, the team. It was less than 10 people. I think there was 8 of us at the time. We sold it off to a company called Quickfire Networks, which is also a startup, which within a week was bought by Facebook. So it was one of those things where I was kind of destined to be at Facebook at some point in my career. I just knew that. Decided to stay because I was only 6 months in at Intel, and there was a lot going on. It was really interesting. And kind of that was at the point in my career. This was 2013, early 2014, where Cafe was just getting open sourced, and I met Yanqing Jie over at UC Berkeley at one of the early retreats. I think it was the one in Tahoe for the Berkeley Vision and Learning Center for those who have been around that long. And we started playing with Cafe, and it was such a cool project, and it was just really interesting how it kind of took off like wildfire. And we gathered a few engineers that were computer vision experts and augmented reality, and we started to just hack on it. We created an OpenCL backend to it. We just thought deep learning was just the coolest thing ever. And we actually even built a headset that was kind of like one of those Intel nukes, but kind of a retrofitted for a headset. It was really ugly, but it worked. And this is kind of the dawn of embedded, AI and computer vision. And we did a lot of custom hacking to make it happen. We were also doing large scale distributed training way back before, the framework just had a torch.distributed API that just does things for you. We actually had to do that, with Cafe and Intel Labs worked on that with us. And so there's some really interesting things that we did on the early days. And that kind of evolved into this role where I was kind of leading, ML strategy and like working on open source and trying to figure out, how do we best get Intel, positioned within this ecosystem. And I learned very quickly that it was very open and collaborative community, and you kind of can't come in and charge money for compilers or have closed source projects, or just put hardware out there and hope the community just accepts it and adopts it kind of organically. You really have to work collaboratively to make that happen. So that started really the strategy around working with the frameworks, and I was a user myself of Pytorch, as well as Cafe, and how do we open source things like the MKLDNN in order to kind of build trust and bring kind of these tools into the community, to help users onto hardware. So that kind of that got me in like kind of hooked on the community and hooked on AI and open source.
Absolutely, and that also brings you to the open source community within Amazon. How did you find it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with working in a cloud provider, especially one that's kind of the 900-pound gorilla like Amazon. It was really interesting. I think it was like between the Onyx work and kind of pulling that together and bringing Amazon into that with Microsoft and Facebook, and seeing the kind of the dawn of distributed training really hit its stride. It was a really interesting experience. I think culturally I probably wasn't the best fit for Amazon. I think I had quite a bit of impact there. And I mean, it was just magical to be able to like spin up 500 GPUs or 1,000 GPUs at the press of a button, and be able to train really large models. It was because at the time we're talking, several years back, where today like we spin up infrastructure kind of like it's no big deal. But having that kind of power was pretty amazing. And just being able to have kind of the broad impact. So bringing like my open source experience and my kind of developer, focused mindset, and then, being able to kind of couple that with just the scale, the pure reach of Amazon, and be able to work, with so many developers and bring tools to so many people globally, was pretty amazing for me.
Totally. So 2018, you Pytorch is just starting. Why did it start? What was the gap that Pytorch tried to address back then?
Yeah, so when I started at Facebook, so it was a really interesting time to join. I was having in 2017, I was having a lot of coffees, and I was actually at Facebook quite a bit. Just meeting with Yanqing and Peter Nordhaus and Bill Jha and a lot of the other folks, that are still around and on my team today, or I work with. And, so I had a really good insight into how things worked there and the different, teammates or team members. And I knew Sumit Chintala even way back, from when we were presenting, some of the distributed training results back in like 2015 and, on Intel. And so I kind of had a lot of the relationships and, just a lot of coffees and a lot of connections. And I knew they were kind of struggling with this. They knew they needed a single framework. They knew that they had this challenge of, Pytorch being like very early days, but somewhat beloved by kind of this cult community. Mm-hmm. And then they had this, this Cafe 2 framework, which was not so much beloved by users, but was incredibly stable, incredibly reliable, incredibly performant. And it was kind of like the foundation of a lot of the production there. And so, I kind of came in January of 2018 and really just had to kind of hit the ground running on what a strategy would look like. And, fundamentally it was a research to production story. Like we saw this unending, deluge of research and just the community moving so fast in machine learning and AI. And we wanted to really leverage a lot of the greatness that was coming out of the community in products. And we knew we had to build community and collaborate and have something open and kind of the mission of FAIR, open collaboration and open research. And so we had kind of the beginnings of that with Pytorch. We didn't have that with Cafe 2. And we also, by the way, we had Onyx that was just kind of getting kicked off, and we had just announced at I think it was NeurIPS, just like the late the year prior, and we were all at that fun party down in Long Beach announcing that. And, we had started to adopt that as well for kind of that bridge between Pytorch and Cafe 2. And what we found is, is we just needed a high velocity path. We had so much research happening inside. We had so many things happening outside of the company. We needed one single platform. And that's really how Pytorch was born. We kind of looked at a bunch of different options, and really at the end of the day, like we felt, this is building a single platform, something that's beloved by developers, something that we could use as a common language for how we collaborated and how we worked with the community, whether it's external, academia, whether it's industry partners, just even within Facebook, just having a common language to speak was really important. So that's kind of what kicked us off. And this has been a long-term strategy that, has buy-in from our CTO, Shrep. I think, Shrep from your days at Facebook. And I still get, a lot of work chat messages from Shrep. Hey, how are things going? Do you need anything? Have you thought about this? So we have the strategy bought in all the way up to our executive team, which is really cool.
Love it. So now you're launching. What are the challenges?
There was some really interesting challenges. There were people challenges. There was, we had different camps. There was the, one side, there was the other side. There was, there was definitely a sentiment with some of the researchers that, hey, this is a research tool. Like, you're kind of polluting it and trying to make it something that used for production. There was the opposite side where, hey, like, this whole crazy dynamic, front end is never going to work with and be able to marry with a static graph for production. So like, that's never going to work. You also had the challenge of just naming it. Everyone had an opinion of what we call it. You have no idea.
I can imagine. I've seen that before.
It was incredible. Everyone had a different opinion. And we, at one point we all just kind of landed on Pytorch. It was like, you know what, this just makes sense. It's the community, we want to leverage and work with, and it's people already recognize Pytorch. So we ended up going down that path. So, and I think the biggest challenge since has really been walking that tightrope between research and production. And, because each have somewhat different needs. You have, on the research side, you kind of want to have this ultimate like expressibility, like any idea you can think of, iterate fast, all of that. And so like this imperative, like eager mode is really cool. But inherently that has, just limitations on performance, right? At some point you're like, op by op execution through eager mode, just you can't, you have a certain amount of overhead with that. And so you kind of have to get creative on how to improve performance and reduce overhead. And so, we constantly have this kind of healthy tension between, what we need to do for the production users, and what we need to do to delight the research and the applied researchers across Facebook and working with the community as well.
Absolutely. That's not an easy challenge to manage, especially with an open source community and keeping track or trying to push an open source project forward. Is it also similar in terms of your experience managing a group internally versus managing an open source community where, like there's no reporting structure or governance and all of that? How's your experience like?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. I don't think there are many projects like Pytorch that are out there that have, this level of scale that is being used by a company like us, but also a lot of other companies as well, whether it's Microsoft or OpenAI or Tesla or Uber, or I can keep naming names. Using Pytorch in their cars or whatever, but also like has such a broad and diverse community, and it really does make it difficult, to kind of bring all of these opinions and all of these needs together and be able to satisfy everyone. So managing this community is incredibly difficult, and we take it really seriously. And sometimes we have to talk about internally, we have these hard conversations of why we're investing engineers on working on certain things. And, because a lot of times it doesn't accrue value, at least ostensibly back, to Facebook. It's like, well, why are we putting engineers on this? Well, you know what, we were working with Tesla on this thing, and it was really, they needed it. And, we've been co-engineering it for quite a while, or with Microsoft or whoever. Mm-hmm. Or we were working with an academic partner on, stochastic weight averaging with Andrew Gordon Wilson at NYU, for example, and why are we doing that? And that's now in core. And so, what we have to remember is like these things like, that we work with, or these partners, like they push us as well. We learn, and the overall platform gets better. It gets more diverse. I mean, diversity of opinion, diversity of thought is good, right? And so you just have to balance that, and I think just make it clear that this is important for the overall platform to succeed. But it's a daily conversation. So the work never ends.
So now in 2020, what are the current challenges that you see with Pytorch, and where do you see the community taking it next?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, one of the biggest challenges is the scale. I mean, we've grown, over 50% year over year in number of contributors. So I think we're approaching 1,600 contributors now.
Wow.
So well over 50% year over year. So we have this huge number of folks that are kind of jumping in and working on the project, which is great. It does require us to review a lot of pull requests and triage a lot of issues and all of that. So it puts strain on the team. I think the other challenge that we have in kind of the current age is really the partnerships. And, for example, just off the cuff, we have Microsoft, we have Amazon, we have OpenAI, we have Google, we have Preferred Networks, Salesforce, Tesla, Uber, LNAI, and I'm missing a bunch. And we, work with all these companies and all these industry labs, in different types of capacities. With Google, we co-engineered XLA on Pytorch, and that project has been going on for, I think, nearly 2 years or even longer. With Microsoft, we have a bunch of things going. We announced, they're supporting our Windows effort. With Amazon, they built a serving platform that was co-engineered, with us. You can serve your Pytorch models. So we have all of these partners, and I'd say the biggest thing for us is scaling up, because it really is becoming this incredibly large community, which is exciting. As far as what's next, I think MLOps is a really interesting area. I know it's gotten in the last year or 2 years, it's gained kind of mainstream consciousness, workflows. We see that obviously, and we've been working on some things that will help there. I think the other interesting things that are kind of near and dear to my heart are areas like privacy preserving machine learning and PPML, as well as, fairness, basically fairness, accountability, and transparency tools, where, we have tools in these areas that we have internally. Some of them we haven't open sourced yet. Some of them we collaborate closely with partners. Like we just released this past Monday, a library called Opacus, which allows you to differentially train your models in Pytorch using your familiar GPUs. And we didn't publish the benchmarks, but it's well over 10x what is out there. I'm not a benchmark guy.
Nice.
I don't like benchmarks. I mean, benchmarks have their place, but I don't like to put ourselves into adversarial positions with folks in the community. So I typically don't like to publish benchmarks. But
10x is a huge improvement.
Yeah, exactly. It's a big improvement in speed, and it allows you to actually get to a level that you can actually scale differential privacy, for actual real products. And so that's what we're finding. We worked with OpenMind and Andrew Trask, over there, and he's over at DeepMind and Oxford, and he's been incredible to work with the last few years. They have thousands of developers globally. They're just building really interesting applications with privacy preserving ML, and working closely with us on Opacus as well. So those are the areas I would say. So
if you have a magical eyeglasses that you can put on to see 2025, where do you see Pytorch in 2025?
It's so funny. The timing of this question is great, because I literally just went through a long-term vision exercise with the team, and we presented it up to our CTO and just this past week. It's funny. I would say really three things. Continue to be community-led, be loved by researchers, and really the foundation of how we build AI. So in other words, I don't think anything would really change. But I truly believe, I think this is a community project, and I wanted to stay that way. I want research is the inception point where things happen, and all of the paradigms are changing. And so we want to work closely with researchers, whether it's our researchers at FAIR or, industry researchers or academia, and the lovely thing is we get such organic engagement with some of the top schools, whether it's, Chris Manning over at Stanford, or Alyosha and Jitendra at Berkeley, or folks at MIT. They just organically use Pytorch, and they reach out and they just say, hey, we love you guys. Thank you so much. By the way, we're teaching all of our classes now in Pytorch. So
nice.
So for us, that is we want to be at the foundation. We want to be at the inception point of where AI and machine learning kind of happens. And so that is our vision. So it's not a complicated one, but it's where we see the project continue to be in 5 years.
Super awesome. Very nice. So now is the lightning round. Are you ready to play?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So the first question, what was the most surprising application of Pytorch for you?
I would say the fact that Mars Candy uses Pytorch to QA my M&Ms was kind of a fun one. It's amazing when you think about state-of-the-art object detection algorithms like Mascaro CNN, and being able to use that to ensure that you have high quality and perfect M&Ms. That to me was the most interesting and surprising application.
Nice. Most surprising or impressive startup or OSS that's not Pytorch, of course, that you have seen recently?
So I'm a big fan of open source for startups. I think they're really cool, and I think they're finding ways to commercialize and build community at the same time. And so I'll give you 3 of them. OctoML, I think Tianchi, from UW has been, an awesome person in the compiler space, and Tianchi Chen. So OctoML is a really interesting one, and they back the project TVM, which is in the Apache Foundation. Hugging Face, I mean, everyone knows Hugging Face. Clem and Julian have done an amazing job of building community around Hugging Face. And then William Falcon, probably over at Pytorch Lightning, is really doing a cool thing. He came out of FAIR as an intern, and he was at NYU, advised by Jan LeCun. And he's building a really interesting startup out of Pytorch Lightning. So those are the 3 that jumped out to me these days that are doing really cool things.
Nice. So what is the most important aspect that the ML community should pay attention to that's not currently paying attention to?
I mean, I think the research community is paying attention to these things, but I think maybe the rest of the community is probably going to take notice pretty quickly. I mean, self-supervision is starting to really take off, and I think we used to call it unsupervised and all of that, and people had formed opinions around unsupervised learning, but self-supervision is a really interesting area that we're seeing actually product impact, and more and more. I mean, there's the contrastive learning paper from Google that came out that's making the rounds and everyone is reading. Also, graph neural networks. I think maybe a year or so ago, we were all really excited about probabilistic learning, and we thought that was going to be really important. And then graph neural networks came out, and we're like, okay, we thought that might be, but really, with probabilistic learning kind of fizzling a little bit, and GNNs actually finding traction with some of the use cases, between those 2, I mean, they're between self-supervision being kind of computationally challenging, it's very expensive, and just the dynamic and variability in GNNs, they're kind of weird, unwieldy to deal with, but there's clear impact that can be brought by those 2.
Totally. The future of ML operations or ML ops is?
Yeah, this is well, I mean, first of all, it should just work. I think it should be, I don't know if it'll be standard, but it should just work. We shouldn't even think about ML ops in 5 years. But I think the thing that's important to remember is I think it should be open as well. I think things that are opaque and black boxy around ML ops, I think will be fewer and far between. I really love some of the platforms that are out there. I mean, Kubeflow pipelines and MLflow are really great projects for lifecycle management, and they're getting better and better. And the operations pieces underneath them, and Kubernetes, I really think the future will be built on open platforms. But in the end, we shouldn't honestly be worried about the operations ML ops in 5 years. It should just work.
Totally. Pytorch is the most
community-centric project.
Nice. Love that. And finally, ML platforms are shooting themselves in the foot because?
I think they shoot themselves in the foot because I think they try and address too many types of users or too many types of personas. One of the things, I mean, this is my product management or PM hat I'm putting on here. If you don't have a clear audience and if you don't have a clear user that you're trying to delight and you're trying to address too many audiences, frankly, you're just not going to delight any of them. And so one of the things that I've learned, we have a blog coming out with named the Autonomous Driving Company. It's coming out here in about a month. But they actually make this point in their blog is, when they looked at all the platforms that were out there, a lot of them kind of put a layer, kind of this veneer over, frameworks. And what they found is their researchers really didn't like that. You want to expose what people love to use. And so basically they wrapped everything around it, but they exposed Pytorch as the kind of authoring language and the entry point. And it exposes all the greatness of what Pytorch is, and it delighted the researchers and the engineers themselves. And if you do that, people will use it and they'll keep coming back. If you try and make it something that is great for beginning users or people that are trying to onboard, or you're trying to also hit the experts, you're not going to hit the right abstraction, and frankly, you won't have good use. You won't have a lot of usage of your platform. So that's what I've learned in all platforms.
Totally, I love that. Joe, it was such an awesome having you today. Thank you very much for making the time and the awesome touching on many technologies in such a short amount of time, but also having such an awesome impact on the community and being community oriented. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lavia. I appreciate it. It was great to be here, and thank you again for inviting me.
Sign up for updates and new episodes at jazzcomputing.com/podcast.